Hello there. In today's video, I'm going to cover the 93 controls defined in the Annex A of the ISO 27001 Information Security Management System Standard. And I'm doing this video in continuation to my last video in which I covered the ISO 27001 main structure. So I'll do a little recap of that and then we will dive into the controls area. So let's get started. This is the ISO 27001 main standard, and the main major clauses of the standard are from 1 till 10 or from 4 till 10, which are the clauses where the requirements are laid down. For this video, my focus will be the Annex A, the controls, which are the best security practices. So, what we did in the last video is the overall structure of the ISO 27001, starting from the objective of the ISMS standard, which is the preservation of the CINA, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability. The main part of the standard, which are from 4 till 10, establishes the ISMS. And within that, there's a clause, which is sixth clause, which requires you to do the risk assessment. And as a result of the risk assessment, when you are treating those high risk areas, then you need to consult the 93 controls, which are the best security practices, which are defined all in Annex A, which is going to be the main focus for my today's video. So these 93 controls are defined in four domains basically, which are my organizational, people, physical, and technology. And originally, they are defined in another standard, which is ISO 27002. You can well refer that standard, which will provide you further insight to the implementation. And there are a lot of valuable information and guidelines provided in ISO 27002. From there, it is taken and attached as Annex A to the ISO 27001 standard. And it is mandatory to consider that Annex A while implementing and while developing an information security management system, whichever controls may apply. So, all these controls are defined in the four domains, and this is further insight to it that the organizational controls and the technology controls, they are the biggest domains out of the four, as you can see. And summing it all up, there are 93 controls. So, what I'm going to do is that I'm going to spend time on some of the key controls from the implementation standpoint and from the external body auditor standpoint so that you can well understand those controls and align yourself well for the external audit. So these are the controls which are defined as Annex A, and they are defined as organizational controls, and we call them A5, A5.1, A5.2. That's how we read them. Among that, the first control that I like you to focus is the threat intelligence. This is a very, very important control. With all the AI and all the technological advancement, artificial intelligence, we need to understand that there are always new threats which are out there, which are arising, and we need to be well aware of those threats, and we need to make sure that in our system we are incorporating those threats and the related controls to protect our system. Some of the great resources to get to know about the latest threats are the Microsoft security blogs. You can refer them. And also the Cyber Security and Infrastructure Agency, which is a government agency. It's called CISA, CISA.gov. And then you can also refer the Hacker News. There are great websites and the dark reading also. So these are all the great websites where a lot of information about the latest vulnerabilities and latest threats which is available, and you people can refer, and that's how you can do your threat intelligence and can protect your system. Then I like you to focus on two controls which goes in tandem basically, the inventory of the information and other associated assets, 5.9 and 5.11, return of the assets. And this is one of those areas where you really need to keep track of all the information assets that the company possesses, and especially when you're doing the remote working, or if you people are having co-locations where you are installing your own servers or your own computing machinery, or any other firewalls or whatever the IT equipment that you are installing there. So you need to keep track of all those assets, and especially when people are leaving or when you are terminating a contract with a third party, how do you ensure the return of those assets which are in their possession, so on and so forth. So a lot of time we auditor find number of issues at the organization that they have not been properly tracked. There are a number of tools available which you can refer to keep track of all these information assets. Then the controls that you should be focusing upon, and these are like foundational level controls: 5.15, which is access control, and 5.18, which is access rights, and both again goes in tandem. And these controls makes the basis of the whole information security management system. You need to define who will access what, both physically and logically. And you need to define based on their roles, based on their responsibilities, based on need to know what they need to know, the access points. So this is the basis of the whole information security management system. The whole security management system gets developed to ensure that the access controls are being practiced. And one of the areas that really uh, companies should focus upon is the review of the user access rights. So that is again a weak area that we find as auditors, that a lot of time the access has been defined. The person has left the organization or even have relocated to another department, but the previous access are still active, or the previous, even the physical badge or the physical card access are still active. So that is one of the areas that you should be looking into. Then moving further ahead, you need to focus on the supplier agreements, which is 520 and goes in tandem with 5.23, which is information security for use of cloud services. Now, with cloud services, we have big giants like AWS, like Azure, like Google Cloud Services. So, so the contracts and the terms and conditions are pretty standard with them, and there's nothing much you can do about it. Nevertheless, the authorized partners which are associated with these giants, and then other suppliers, even which are acting on your behalf, or which are accessing your data, or which are providing you other services, you need to make sure what are the terms and conditions agreed with them, what are the liabilities agreed, what are the service level agreements that is agreed, and then somebody may be reviewing those service level agreements, that are they supplying their services as per those SLAs, are they complying with those SLAs, so on and so forth. So one need to be really paying attention to those areas, especially at the co-location when some other suppliers, third party suppliers, are accessing your co-locations on your behalf. So you need to pay attention to those supplier contracts and the information security terms and conditions within those contracts. So that is an area of focus that you should be focusing upon. Then, as the name implies, the business continuity. So ICT is information and communication technology. And the issue with the business continuity is that the testing is not that strong. And I will get back to this 5.30 when I get to the technological controls, in which there's a backup testing. And people start thinking that the testing of the BCP is the restoration of the backups, which is only part of the business continuity planning. Where they miss out, the organization normally, are the areas where they do not test the tools and the applications which they need to restore, and check the whole business continuity plan. So business continuity plans are there at the organization, but the testing are the areas where they were normally found weak, and as an organization you should pay attention to that. Then the PII, the personally identifiable information. And you need to understand the PII from three standpoint. One is your customer related PII. So any personally identifiable information which is related to your customers. And then your customers' clients' data, which involves any PII. And the third angle is to look at your own employees' personally identifiable information. So all these three aspects needs to be looked into from the standpoint of the legal and regulatory requirements which are applicable in that particular region, and the controls needs to be complied and needs to be implemented to ensure that all these legal and regulatory requirements are complied at all the point of time. So this is one of the areas that you should be focusing upon, and these are the three angles or three dimensions that you need to look into with respect to the PII information. Then, as the name implies, we have A5, which are people control. And normally, we auditors found this pretty structured at the organization because of the structuredness at the HR. So, the human resources are normally structured at the organization. So, I would not go into the details of these controls. And a lot of these controls, as you can see, are pretty self explanatory. So, and they are pretty structured. So, there's nothing further I can add to this people's control except that you really need to make sure that HR is doing all of that 6.1 till 6.8. Then let's move on to the next domain, which is physical controls. And among the physical controls, again, this is pretty self explanatory. Wherever the physical areas where the information assets are there, you need to make sure that they are suitably protected, as well as the risk assessment that you have done for those assets. Interestingly, for the physical controls, it can be declared as not applicable for virtual companies where the companies all exist on the cloud based services and people are working remotely. So they do not have a practical office out there. So the physical control is one of those controls which can be declared as not applicable in that kind of a scenario. Nevertheless, wherever the physical control applies, that needs to be monitored, vis-a-vis was the information assets lying within those physical premises. And the among the physical controls, the control that you should be focusing upon are the asset related controls. How the different assets, especially regarding your storage media, are being handled by the company. What is the policy of putting those assets, getting those assets off premises, and then what is the policy to manage the storage media if it is going off premises? How do you make sure that it has been disposed of, even if you are handling it to the third party? And how do you make sure that no information is going out to the third party, so on and so forth? So those are the areas that we auditor found weak in the organization. And then the disposal and reuse of the equipment. So in case you are reusing that same equipment, this is a very normal practice at a number of organizations. How do you make sure that the reuse of those equipment, none of the previous employee information or previous information was is there on that particular equipment? So you need to make sure of that. Then we talk about the technological controls. And among the technological controls, the top one is the TVM, which is called Technical Vulnerability Management. In easy language, it is also called patch management. And this is as a result of the technical vulnerabilities that you may found, and you keep on assessing within your application, within your networks, within your parameter, the IT parameter that you have, and you need to apply patches to compensate, to counter those vulnerabilities, or you may have some compensatory controls, even like the firewall settings, like the access control settings, like the privilege management to counter those vulnerabilities. But that's a constant thing that you need to be doing. And most importantly, when you're running those patches, then who's authorized to run that? And then how do you make sure what is the contingency mechanism in case that those new patches may be incompatible with the existing infrastructure? So how do you roll it back and may not let it impact your main operations? So all that needs to be considered within the technical vulnerability management. The other important control that you need to be focusing upon is configuration management. Now, configuration management really goes with the earlier control of the access control that we discussed among the organizational controls. And whatever the access points that we have defined, we need to make sure that we configure our systems, our routers, our cables, and everything as per those access control policies. We need to make sure that they are all implemented. Who will access what, and who can change those configuration of your network infrastructure? That all needs to be predefined, and that all needs to be ensured to be implemented as per the company policy. This is the control which I was discussing in the earlier ICT and business continuity controls among the organizational controls, which was A5.30. And this goes in tandem. But if you are just testing the backups, then you are not doing the business continuity. So, one of the other things that I found, if we specifically talk about this particular control, is that people are doing the test, but then they are doing the partial testing, and they are not retrieving all of the data that is part or that is within the scope of the information security management system. So that is something you need to make sure and you need to pay attention to. And also, this backup needs to be done regular testing. So retrieval of the backup needs to be a regular feature at the organization. Then, among others, this is one of the controls which goes in tandem with the technical vulnerability management also. When you are running any patches or when you are running any new applications and software, how do you make, or installing them, how do you make sure that they are not impacting your current operational system? So, what are the process? What is the who's authorizing it? What is the testing methodology before you put it in the operational phase, and then what is the rollback and contingency mechanism? That's all needs to be first sorted out before you install any new software or applications. Then web filtering. Now, web filtering, as the name implies, and at this point, this is done by some great tools which are out there, like, for example, Cisco Umbrella and FortiGuard and Palo Alto Networks. And then there are open tools as well, like Pi-hole and things like that, through which you can really ensure number of your policies, and they do a great job in filtering the web as per the company policy. So that is something you really need to focus upon. One of the areas that I may highlight is that company has defined a policy for web filtering, which is allowed and which is not allowed. But then this is not implemented on the tools. So they have the tools, but then it is not fully implemented. So you need to pay attention that whichever the policy the company has defined, that is all implemented through the tools that you are having. Outsource development, this again goes in line with the previous control that we discussed regarding the supplier management. So this is pretty much aligned, and you need to make sure that if there is any outsource development, how you are making sure that the supplied product are not coming with any vulnerabilities which may impact your operations. So all of that needs to be made sure. And last control that I like to highlight is the test information. So testing information is very, very important, especially in those areas where you need to provide the testing information to the testers from the actual production data. So how do you protect that data, and especially if that data is comprising of any PIIs? So how do you make sure that it may not be disclosed to any of the testers? There are a number of techniques available through which you change the data by running certain algorithms, and you need to make sure of that if you are using if the testing of the information is applicable to your particular environment. So, my friends, this is a short understanding of the controls which are defined, which are provided in the Annex A of the ISO 27001 standard. I hope that will give you enough insight to better understand the controls, and from the standpoint of the external audit, or normally what are the weaknesses at the organization vis-a-vis those controls. So I hope whatever the little information that I shared with you would be of benefit to you. And hopefully, I will see you again when I post my next video. Thank you.